King, Guillermo Vasquez Velasco, who's right up there waving at us, to give some remarks. And then my boss, Michael Ewing, would give some remarks. And then I could give some remarks. That's not what you're here. You're here to hear about complete streets. So I told them they don't get the microphone, but wave at us, because they're important guys. They sign my paycheck. And we're really glad you're here. But you're here to hear Cynthia Hoyle. The most amazing thing I found, I've known Cynthia for a long time. The interesting thing I found is that she's been in planning practice for 30 years, which means she started when she was 12. There are not many planners who have done that. I mean, this will be clear to me. Her undergraduate degree was in sociology, like our local planning director. Her master's in city planning came from the University of Oklahoma. She spent a lot of life in Oklahoma, and actually married to Stillwater, Oklahoma. She published a report, planning advisory service report on traffic calming in 1995. The one that a lot of people lose track of calming fast bands. Some people thought it was still a radical idea. And she's serious about this complete street stuff. She is actually a lead certified cycling instructor. So if you want to learn about safe cycling in difficult circumstances, she's qualified to teach that. Perhaps more important than that, she is a fellow of the American Institute of Certified Planners and an experienced trainer in the rest of the program at CBS.
Does that get it on? Thank you, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. I'm thrilled to see so many people are excited about complete streets that they come in on a beautiful day to learn about them. And I'm delighted to be at Ball State. This is my first trip here, and I'll do some more introductions as we go along. So I'm going to start right in here so that we can cover a lot of information for you today. Complete streets is a name given to an idea that's been around that we know how to build them right. We have done this in the past, and sometimes we still do it. As you can see, everyone is accommodated here, and you also notice that on one side of the street they have back-in angled parking. I could talk about that if someone's interested too. So the question is, why are we still building roads like this? There is a housing complex on one side and the commercial is on the other. And so how does the pedestrian cross the street? Why do we build this for transit? How are they supposed to get there? And for bicyclists, it just ends, and nowhere do you have a complete bicycle system without using city streets as part of that system. It's a very important part of providing a transportation system for bicycling. And then we have this. People with access issues, it's very difficult for them to get around. We did see quite a few locations today on my tour of Muncie that had sidewalks like that just ended. So I want to do a few introductions. Thank you for the very nice introduction. And what I want to do, since we have a lot of people here, is have you raise hands. I'd like to know how many planning students we have here in the audience. All right. Architecture students? Well, you don't have to be frightened. Landscape architects? And we have faculty here and great administrators. We've got some city people too. Yeah, engineers? Any engineers here? It's okay. We're not going to yell at you. So, welcome everybody. And Eric did a good job saying who I am, and I'm also an instructor with the National Complete Streets Coalition. So this is just a little outline of what we're going to talk about today. Why, what are the benefits, how we can create policies that are successful, what is a complete street. You may be surprised as you look at some of the things I call a complete street. Talk about policies themselves, offer you some resources, and then as part of Q&A we can talk about where do we go from here. So what is a complete street? Well, here is your definition. It just means that everybody is accommodated to be able to travel comfortably and conveniently and safely. And it ensures that everyone has access, and that includes people who are often left without transportation, the elderly, children, those with disabilities. Everybody wins with complete streets. This is a win-win, and I will go through and you will see why as we talk about this. It provides for all users, and there are all kinds of different complete streets. But the issue is giving people mobility and access. This is the sort of thing that we see, right-of-ways that have been designed only for vehicles. So you end up with what I have called goat trails, and a lot of people call goat trails. On my tour today, I was saying that in communities I've lived in, worked in the past, they say, well, there are no pedestrians there, so why should we build a sidewalk? And I would say, well, if you didn't have a street, there wouldn't be any cars either. So you build, they will come, and if you connect it, they will come. So this shows you how they retrofit a street. So why have a policy? Well, the reason is that it then becomes the default design. It's not a special design. It's not an add-on. It is the way that you plan and build your community. You don't have to prove that these facilities are needed. It's assumed that they will be needed and used. And then there's the issue of how we invest our transportation dollars. And as I will talk about later, you don't need a special fund for complete streets. You can use your existing funding and accomplish this as you move along. If you have additional funding to add in complete streets, that's fabulous. In many communities, they get grants to redo roads with the goal in mind of creating a complete street. But if you have the policy, then you can take advantage of all of the new construction, renovation, repaving, and put in the facilities that are needed. And it will ensure that all of your streets provide infrastructure for all travelers. It also saves money, and I heard a story here about how there's a neighborhood where some people wanted to put the sidewalks back in. Not only is it often difficult to retrofit them in terms of expense, it also becomes politically difficult. So if you do it right to start with, then you don't have to go back and do all of the things that are necessary, and you will save money. The other reason is so that you create a complete network. And you see, as planners, you know, you've got the top interconnected design here, and then the completely disconnected cul-de-sac design that was popular for many years. It separates land uses and separates people from the uses they want to get to. The other thing is it gives transportation professionals permission to do what they already know how to do and to come up with innovative solutions in situations in which a retrofit needs innovative solutions. Engineers are problem solvers. If you give them a problem to solve, they will find a way to solve it. So if you say, this is our policy and this is what we're going to do, they will come up with designs to implement it. Additionally, it's the right thing to do, and this is a quote from our Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood, who is from Illinois. He's a Midwesterner, and he said this, that complete streets merge his two priorities, safety and livable communities. And so this has been a policy at the federal level for the last few years. Who wants complete streets? Well, it turns out most people would like to have complete streets. And there was a recent report from the National Association of Realtors, once again showing that houses that are on trails and are connected in with sidewalks and people can walk to destinations, those properties have more value. That property is worth more than property in a disconnected subdivision. Additionally, we've got 30% of our population that doesn't drive, and as aging baby boomers are hitting, we're going to have more and more people who are not driving. And so how are we going to move those people around? We need to give them options in transportation so that when you get older and you have to surrender your driver's license, you're not stranded. So here's a survey that was done, and it shows you how people say they would like to have transportation funding allocated. They would like to see 41% going to public transportation. How much do you think we put towards public transportation now? Any guesses? 10%? Okay. And bicycling and walking, 22%. Any guesses how much goes towards that? There's the answer. You're doing pretty good on public transportation, but people would like to have more. And so this is something that the public supports. Some of you may be aware that the transportation bill that was recently introduced and passed out of committee in Congress eliminated any designated funding for walking and biking and cut the funding that has been there since the Reagan administration for transit. So that would be a serious step backwards in providing options for access for a lot of Americans. 21% of older Americans, those 65 and over, do not drive. And many of them are stranded and often do not do the things that they would do on a daily basis because they lack travel options. 54% of older Americans in this country are living in in-hospital neighborhoods. And it's not healthy to live someplace where you cannot walk. As you get older, walking is an important part of your everyday activity. They would walk or ride more if they had the infrastructure. There's the whole issue of health in this country, and as you know, we have a serious problem with obesity, and lack of activity has become a focus of the CDC and other health providers. As a planner, I can tell you, I tell people one of the best things that ever happened to planning was when the health community got behind how we're building our environments. The built environment they have identified as a major factor in health in this country, and they are pushing for building communities in which people can have active transportation. So all of these diseases could be reduced by giving people the opportunity to incorporate activity into their everyday lives without having to make a special trip to the gym or take time out to go and exercise. Low-income Americans in particular have trouble finding time to go exercise. It needs to be able to be part of their everyday lifestyle. And all of the research also shows that when exercise is part of your everyday lifestyle, you are much more likely to get it. So here we are. Residents will walk more if they live in a neighborhood where they can do that. If you have bike lanes, people bicycle more. I have this discussion with some of my bicycling friends who are vehicular cyclists who think that we should just be in the roadway with the cars. But the truth is most people want to have infrastructure for bicycling to feel safe to bicycle. So we need to provide for all those users on the road. Transit users also, by walking back and forth to the bus stop, often meet a lot of their daily needs for activity. And so if you look at the health of people who ride transit, they are often more fit than people who drive all the time. And this has been documented. You may have seen some of the studies where they've evaluated people who live in auto-dependent suburbs and people who live in areas where they can walk and bike. And even if you hold constant for all other factors, income, age, exercise, the people who live in a walkable place weigh 5 pounds less. This chart is interesting. It is a correlation. It doesn't show causation, but I think it's a fairly convincing case that in places where people can walk and bike, you have lower obesity rates. There's also the safety factor. We have thousands of people who are killed every year by motor vehicles because they were trying to get where they needed to go by walking or biking. A sidewalk can reduce those crashes by 88%. And intersections that are designed for pedestrians reduce risk as well. So I was recently listening to a webinar where the presenter referred to this as transportation violence, which I thought was very interesting. The other issues, people have mobility issues, people who are blind, who are deaf, who are in wheelchairs, who might have the problem of not being mentally able to drive a vehicle. So here's some data for you. I work for the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District as a contractor and have for 10 years because they have taken a leadership role in the community in advocating for active transportation. If you build the community so that people can access regular transit routes, they have more mobility, it costs much less, and everybody's happier. So you can see here a year of providing paratransit service, $38,500, one retrofit to making a bus stop accessible is a one-time expenditure, and then people have better mobility. You also have to, of course, have a transit system that provides accessible vehicles, but that's not too hard to do now. Then there are, of course, the global issues of environment and greenhouse gas emission, noise of roads. Having all of those vehicles on the roads is expensive because it does cause wear and tear. So there are other reasons, economic reasons, that complete streets are a good solution. Widening roads is very expensive, and you have less need to widen roads if people have the opportunity to make some of their trips by means other than driving. And as you see here, 50% of our daily trips are 3 miles or less. If you take a pin, and you can do this, by the way, on the Cliff Bar 2-mile challenge. If you go to that site, you can put where you live, and it will show you the circumference of everything within 2 miles, and you might be surprised at how much is within 2 miles of your house. It's a really good website. I can recommend it. So if we could switch a few of those trips to active transportation, it benefits us in multiple ways. As I said, multimodal streets are good for the economy, and people will leave their car at home, and then if they don't have to spend as much on their vehicles, they have more money to spend in the local economy. I wanted to show you this picture of what happened to Complete Streets retrofit in Urbana. This is a nice little cafe on campus. You see what it looked like before. The day that they finished his sidewalk in the street, the owner went out and bought all of this stuff and expanded his cafe. And it changes the character of a street. So I think this may be David Letterman's mom. And here she is, and how intimidating is that? They found in one study that seniors crossing the street, they didn't understand the ped heads, and as soon as it started flashing, don't walk, they turn around and go back, and they never had enough time to get across the street. And they are also intimidated by the width of the street. And so I've been in Florida. My mother-in-law lives down in Sproul Land, and I've been down there, and I watched the pedestrians. Even though they had enough time to cross the street, they inevitably started running before they got all the way across because you feel so vulnerable out there on that tremendously wide street surrounded by vehicles on all sides. So it will change your intersection design. And you can have this, and you have done some of this. I saw some locations where a pedestrian refuge island was provided, and then making sure that your crosswalk markings are also the best for visibility for both pedestrians and motorists. It changes bicycling. You can have this instead of that. It changes transit. We've seen this. And by the way, when you have a transit stop, there should be a crosswalk. Putting in a transit stop without a crosswalk means that you're going to have people darting across the street. And there was a horrible case recently in Georgia where a mother was charged for trying to cross the street to her apartment complex after she got off the bus and her child was hit because she could not get across the street. But she was charged with negligence because she was trying to cross the street without a crosswalk because there wasn't one. That's not fair and it's not right. People with disabilities, I saw a lot of poles and fire plugs in the middle of sidewalks in Muncie, and I noticed on campus they've moved them off of the sidewalk, and so that's something you need to look at and consider. Having good ramps and meeting ADA standards, and completing streets and trails. Like I said, you need complete streets and trails to create a comprehensive non-motorized network and to give people the opportunity to get where they need to go without driving. So what complete streets are not? It's not a prescription. There's not one kind of complete street. They are context sensitive. It's not a mandate for immediate retrofits. And it's not going to solve all of the problems. As you know, land use and other issues impact how your streets and your transportation system function. But having a policy will definitely help and move you in the right direction. So what does a complete street look like? And as I said, there isn't just one kind. There are lots of different kinds, and there's no magic formula. So you as a community make these determinations for yourself. So here is a slow-speed shared street. Even though it's a commercial street, the traffic is going slowly enough that everyone is accommodated. You've got the sidewalks, and you've got transit, you've got parking so that motor vehicles can gain access, and it works. This is a pedestrian refuge island that was put in to provide access to a school. So this was a Safe Routes to School project. That's all it took to make it safer for kids to be able to get to school. This is a rural complete street. Providing shoulders in rural areas provides a place for bicyclists. It provides a place for pedestrians as well. They used to have a lot of elderly people who were run over and killed whenever their checks were delivered from Social Security because their mailboxes were out on the road. And this would have solved a lot of that problem. Of course, now they get direct transfer into their accounts, but when people have to go out and take their lives at risk to pick up their mail, it doesn't seem necessary, and it's not. Then you have busy multimodal thoroughfares, and you've got some of those in this community that you can retrofit, where you do want to put in bike lanes, and you do want to have crosswalks, and you do want to have all of those different pieces in place. Transit is part of this too, and since I work with a transit agency and I work with the bicycling community, as you might imagine, I'm here in the middle between the two of them, the bus drivers complaining about the cyclists and the cyclists complaining about the bus drivers. We all are going to have to learn how to share the road, and it is possible and it can be safe, and there are ways to design to accommodate that. Note, by the way, that when they were doing construction, they didn't just block off the sidewalk and leave people to figure out how the heck to get where they needed to go. They put a barrier out, and they shortened the width of the street and provided for pedestrians. This is a suburban thoroughfare, and this is a shoulder on the thoroughfare. Those are recommended in the MUTCD. It's wide enough to be used by bicyclists. The vehicular cyclists may be in the lane. They may not want to use this, but it provides an option. And then you've got the sidewalk with a buffer in between. Pedestrians are much more comfortable if there is a buffer between them and the traffic. Having the sidewalk right on the street is a pretty uncomfortable place for pedestrians, and they do not feel as safe. This is a skinny residential street. And you've got sidewalks, but you don't need a bike lane. And it's skinny, so it slows traffic. It makes it safer. This is a low traffic residential street. It's a low density, and this works well because there's not much traffic. It's not going fast. It's not a cut-through location. And so the pedestrians are comfortable walking there. So you don't have to have sidewalks everywhere. But if you've got much traffic, you do need sidewalks. Here's a historic Main Street, and you can see what they've done is the bulb outs. Do people know what I'm talking about when I say bulb outs? It's where you bring the sidewalk out, and so that provides protected parking along the streets. That also buffers the sidewalk for the pedestrians. And the shade is also wonderful for cyclists and pedestrians along the sidewalk. So there are many kinds of complete streets. As I said, complete streets and context-sensitive design go together. Not every street has to have sidewalks, bike lanes, and transit. What you have to look at is the land use, who is likely to use the street, how do people get to their destinations, what do they need to get to their destinations, and what's appropriate in this location. In some cases, you also have the issue of constrained right-of-way, and so that's another issue that is often has to be dealt with. So here's the Green Book. Do you all know what the Green Book is? Nope. Well, that is the book that engineers, that is their Bible for building roads. Those are the standards that they use in designing streets. They tend to go with exactly what it says in there when in fact it gives a lot of leeway for engineers to make decisions about how streets are designed. And so they quoted in here that shoulders are part of the city streets and those can be used for bike lanes. So that's one thing that you can bring up. You will note here as well that the travel lane is 11 feet. You can do 10 feet on streets where you do not have larger vehicles on a regular basis. Our buses operate on the campus of the University of Illinois in many locations with 10-foot lanes. It's not ideal, but we do it, and it keeps the traffic going slower. And everybody who's using transit is a bicyclist or a pedestrian getting to and from the bus. So we have to provide those connections for people to make transit part of their transportation solutions. So one of the things that you can look at in terms of the cross-section for streets is designing it from the outside in instead of from the inside out. And so what do I mean by that? Well, you start with the sidewalk. Then you look at the distance that you have, the space that you have for the road. Do you have space for a bike lane? Is a bike lane needed? How much space do you need for your travel lanes? How much traffic do you have here? What about funding? This was an issue that we've already discussed. There are all kinds of options. So I ran this presentation by my husband and my daughter, and they said, well, what are all those acronyms? Does anybody here know what they are? Can you all tell me what STP is? Yes?
What surface transportation program?
Correct. That is the federal legislation. CMAQ is the clean air quality legislation, and many places use that money to address putting in infrastructure to allow people to shift modes to help them meet their clean air requirements. I don't know about you. I'm in an attainment area, and so it's kind of ridiculous to be disappointed that your air quality is so good. But we don't have any of this funding, and you probably, are you in an attainment area? Or, yeah, so you're not going to have that funding either. But as you, you're a maintenance area. Okay, all right. As you go out to work in bigger communities, they're in a non-attainment area, and they are under federal requirements to improve their air quality. And one of the ways to do that is to reduce the amount of driving. In fact, most places that's really the only way that they're going to get there. In the Midwest, we have still some coal power plants that we can get rid of, but places like Los Angeles, it's about getting people out of cars. So while retrofit funding is important, it is not necessary to get started. You can start a complete streets program here and make a lot of headway without having a special pot of money. So does it cost more? And that's another concern. People think it's going to cost a lot more. Well, actually, it can cost less. If you don't require lanes to be so wide, then you have to put in less paving. The paving is the expensive item on your streets. And so if you can narrow the lane width down and widen the sidewalks, sidewalks are a lot less expensive per square foot than a roadway. So there are ways to do this. For example, we have done several road diets in our community, taken a 4-lane street and made it into 1 lane each direction, a center turn lane. It improves safety dramatically. The first one that we did in Urbana, there was an enormous amount of screaming and yelling and carrying on. I had people, sorry about that. I had people jumping me about it. I don't even work for the city. And it's counterintuitive to people that you can actually improve traffic flow by reducing the number of lanes. But it did not change the traffic flow, and it improved safety enormously, because what happens is if you have the center turn lane, then you have people turning left out of that lane instead of stopping in a lane, and a lot of your crashes are a result of people coming up behind someone who stopped and trying to go around and getting hit from that side. It also creates a multi-lane crash threat for pedestrians when you have 4 lanes, because if they try and cross and one car stops for them, the car over here isn't going to see them and the pedestrian can't see the other car. So they walk out, they get hit, and it's usually at a fairly high speed. So those crashes are serious crashes. So timing signals can also be helpful in maintaining a slower traffic flow. People don't mind going slower if they don't have to sit at traffic lights. How many of you like sitting at red lights? Would you be willing to go 5 miles per hour slower if you didn't have to stop at traffic signals? Yes. That's what this is about. And slower traffic is safer. In the city of Chicago, when they put in bike lanes and did some road diets, crashes for all vehicles went down. The crashes for cars went down. Everybody was safer on the roadway when they did this. And safety should be our first priority. Here's a road diet that we did in Urbana. So originally we had the 4 lanes. You can see the sidewalks there. It's not great. And this intersection was proposed for a roundabout, by the way, so we're just still discussing that. So we went in this area was a former 1960s commercial strip that used to have a Kmart and a grocery store. All of those things went away, and it was suffering. And so they took a look, they brought the neighborhood in, and they did a plan. They did a landscaping plan. Some people thought that was hilarious that we would do a landscaping plan, but how your environment looks and feels matters. And so they repaved the street, they put in the bike lanes. This where's my arrow? This is a bus stop. And so they put in a pedestrian refuge island so that people can get back and forth. There are a lot of apartment complexes in this area, a lot of low-income households, and the transit is heavily used, so people needed to be able to get back and forth. And do you walk down to the corner to use the signal? How many of you walk down to the corner to use the signal when the bus lets you off in the middle of the block? Would you raise your hand? Most people are going to cross where they get off of the bus. So we are at what I have called a transformative moment with shrinking budgets locally. Muncie's in the same boat all of the rest of us are in. The costs for building roads is going up. Our revenues for taking care of and building roads is going down. Our federal tax, fuel tax, is not indexed, which means it doesn't go up with inflation. It's based on usage. As fewer of us drive and get more efficient vehicles, the revenue is actually declining, which is why we are in a crisis at the federal level with funding our transportation system. So we've got to address these issues, and this is one thing that can help us with that. The quality of life in a community makes a difference now. We are a global economy, for better or for worse, and a lot of younger people now are choosing where they live based on the quality of the life in the community because they can work remotely electronically. And so they don't have to live near their employer. So there are a lot of good reasons for this. You've all probably heard of Richard Florida, right? And the issues of the creative class. Being able to move around a community without having to own a car is actually important to a lot of younger people now. My own daughter doesn't have a car. My mother offered to buy her a car, and my daughter told her she didn't want one, but she would take a new bicycle. She doesn't want the expense. She doesn't want to spend the money on a car. She doesn't like driving a car, and so she chose to live where she can get around without having to have a car. A lot of people are doing this. So a complete streets policy would help you and your community build your streets so that they are well planned and designed and operated to provide safe access for all users. So here's what a complete streets policy would ideally include. Planners love visions. We've got a vision here. So what's your vision for complete streets? You want to make sure it includes all the modes. It provides connectivity. I'm sure you've been discussing that as well. It applies to all transportation, whether it's a resurfacing, restriping, building a new road. All of those would be covered. There will be exceptions, and you do have to have exceptions and provide a process for those to be approved appropriately. You want to use the latest designs and have some flexibility in there. You want them to be context sensitive based on the adjoining land use, the sort of traffic that you have, and you want to set performance standards. This is one thing that I will talk about a little bit more, is how are you measuring it? If you're measuring the traffic on your campus and you're saying, well, we want level of service A, well, that's not actually good for pedestrians and bicyclists, because that means the vehicles are moving fast. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then you need to set out some steps for implementation. You don't have to put the implementation in your policy, but you need to include steps in there. So just to reiterate, complete streets are sensitive to the community. They serve the adjacent land uses and anyone who might potentially be using that street. This is a growing movement. This is the number of policies that have been adopted in the country, and you can see that it is really increasing dramatically. This has become a way for communities to address a lot of issues that is doable. This is a map of where complete streets policies are in the country. This is 2010, and more have been adopted since then. And so you can take a look at this. It's on the Complete Streets website, and I will be giving you that. And it's down here. In fact, it's completestreets.org, so you can easily get there. There are different kinds of policies, and there's also an entire report on the website analyzing all the policies, pointing out good policies in different communities. Champaign was mentioned as one. That was part of their transportation master plan. So they are done in different ways, and so you have the ability to approach this through whatever works for your community. This is also extremely interesting. What do you notice about this chart? Does anybody want to tell me what you notice about the communities that have adopted policies? Are the big cities leading the way? No, they are not. It's actually suburbs, smaller cities, and rural areas have been looking at this and adopting them as well. I did a workshop in Whatcom County, Washington, and all of the small communities came in and they wanted to figure out how to do complete streets in their rural areas. Just a couple of examples before I wrap up here. This is Decatur, Georgia, and this is their vision statement. They want to create a safe, efficient transportation system that promotes the health and mobility of their citizens and visitors and gives better access to businesses and neighborhoods. And then they included some goals. And you can see that physical activity was one of them. And they wanted to provide people with good movement and give all ages. So let me ask this question. How many of you walked or biked to school when you were growing up? Will you raise your hand? Exactly. The number of kids who walk and bike to school has dropped dramatically since the 1960s. Kids do not have the ability to independently get where they need to go. That's a real loss. When I do bicycle workshops, what we do to introduce everybody to one another is we have people tell us about their first bike. And it's really interesting because people just light up when they start talking about their first bike, and you ask them to give you one word for what having that bike meant. What word do you think it was? Freedom. Yes. Children had the freedom to move around. And they learn from that. They learn to make decisions. They get to learn critical decision-making skills if they are allowed to be on their own. So since Champaign, Illinois was included as a model for complete streets policies, I thought, and this was actually in the there's a national complete streets instructor site and a template presentation, and this one was even in there, that we, in our transportation master plan, and I was on the steering committee, will provide a dense interconnected network. And Champaign has, like a lot of communities, in the core, the older traditional neighborhood had sidewalks. Then there's a donut built in the 1950s up through like 1980s, where they said sidewalks are not necessary. I guess we're all going to be like the Jetsons, you know, and fly into our houses at some point. And then they started requiring them again. So they have a donut in the core that does not have all the sidewalks and connections that they would like. But they're looking at and going back and figuring out how to do this. And they have recently adopted design standards for all street types that require the infrastructure needed to help people get where they need to go. So how do we do this? Well, first you want to do your policy and your vision statement. Then create an implementation plan. Lots of places will adopt a policy. If you don't have a plan for implementation, it doesn't really happen. You need to figure out the steps that you have to take to get there. The goals need to be clear, and you need to have a way to measure your progress. What would you measure? Tell me what you think you would measure to know whether you're getting there or not. Any ideas?
Number of people who walk or hike to work or school.
Yes. Yeah, the number of people who walk or bike to get to and from school. What about trips to work? Take a look at how many people are using transit, walking, and biking. Another thing that you can do is take a look at parking permits. We have had a reduction in purchase of parking permits in both cities and the University of Illinois for the core of the community. So, and we have just now gotten some data back that shows that we have actually reduced our average daily traffic on campus. But we've increased transit ridership, walking, and biking. The other thing you may want to look at is safety. What about crashes? How many fatalities are you having? You can look at things like miles of sidewalk built, miles of bike lanes built. There are all kinds of ways that you can look at this. So then you may need to do some adjustments. Planners know you have to go back and take a look and see whether you're achieving your goals were what you wanted. Do you want to change them, expand them? And make sure you have measurements that measure your goals. And that is very important. So, in order for this to be effective, you need to also reevaluate your procedures, your policies, and your programs. You need to look at your subdivision regulations. And if you're putting bike lanes in, you're going to need to look at your street cleaning. Are you going to clear the bike lanes when it snows? Otherwise, where do they bicycle? And no, bike lanes are not snow storage devices. So, it's been an issue in our community. You want to take a look at your design manuals and all of your standards. You want to create new performance measures. You need to offer training to your planners and engineers. The National Complete Streets Coalition does offer training workshops specifically for that purpose. Also, there are resources, and I have this copy with me. You can get this off of it's from APA, the Complete Streets book. This is a PAS report. And it includes a lot of great information, and you can use all of that. You can go to the website, as I mentioned. There are fact sheets, little 1 and 2, 3-page fact sheets that are very helpful in providing information and documenting some of the things I've mentioned to you today. They have a newsletter. You can sign up for that. There's a blog, a Twitter feed, you name it, they've got it. There's a presentation on there as well, by the way, that you can download and use to show people what you're talking about. We have, like I said, we have all these workshops. You can do a laying a foundation for complete streets, which is helping people develop and start talking about how and what their policy will be. Then in terms of implementation, you can take a look at that. These are 1 and 2, 3-day workshops, and you can look at that on the website as well. This is the coalition and the steering committee for the National Complete Streets Coalition. You can see it's a pretty diverse organization. It goes from engineers to bicyclists to aging agencies, disabled, Smart Growth America, AARP. AARP has written about complete streets a lot, and they endorse them heavily. So I'm going to wrap up with that. Here's my information. My daughter took a look at that last night and she said, "That's weird." But I thought it was kind of cute that the dog was happy to carry the flag across. Have any of you seen a pedestrian crossing with a flag before? Raise your hand. Yeah, I've seen them. In some places they use those and they work very well. So that is my presentation, and I can answer a few questions if anybody has any. Yes?
How do you control a state and federal roads, particularly those in downtowns and locally?
Well, the Federal Highway Administration has a context-sensitive requirement. They require that streets that use federal funds be context-sensitive. And by the way, the director of our planning, of our transit district, found that if you use federal funds for building infrastructure, like sidewalks, for example, you have to take care of snow removal. We haven't made a big stink about that locally, but we did just pass snow removal ordinance for part of the community. I couldn't believe it when I moved here and they didn't require people to clear sidewalks, and so all the pedestrians are in the street when it snows. So that's something you have to take a look at as well. So yes, that can be a problem if officials at those levels are not aware of their requirements and policies. But according to the feds, complete streets and context-sensitive design are the guides that they should be using. Your Department of Transportation can also take a look at this. Complete Streets sometimes is brought in to conduct workshops with the engineers at DOTs. That's a pretty tough audience, and they have to bring an engineer in because engineers don't think planners know anything. So they have to have an engineer talk to the engineers. But you can deal with that. It does come up. I hear cases about this all the time, and I say, you know what? I don't think that fits the federal mandates, and maybe they ought to contact their district office of the Federal Highway Administration and ask about that project.
If you didn't have confidence that the considered dedication of the state or federal roads to the enforcement.
Well, that depends on what... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to repeat the question. So the question was, what about the federal and state levels? And then the follow-up question was, should the city consider taking possession of a street from the state as a way to have control over it? That really depends on the community and whether or not you want possession of that street and whether you can afford to maintain the street. And so I can't tell you yes or no. It's going to depend on the situation. If you can, sure, take it, and then you can do what you want with it and put your standards on it. Yes? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So let me answer that since I have to repeat the question. The question was, what about reaching out to local business owners and taking them out and walking these areas with them? That's a fabulous idea, and it's called a walking audit. And there are tools online that you can use, and there are workshops and people who do this exclusively. I was talking about Dan Burden when we were doing our tour. He is great at doing this. And he has a website, Google Dan Burden, and it'll pull up his website. And they take people out, and you spend a day going through the whole idea and taking walks. And I suggested for your community as well that you have some wheelchairs there, because it looked to me like this would be a very difficult place to be if you had mobility challenges. A lot of curb cuts missing, sidewalks missing, ramps that are in the wrong places and not designed right. And business owners, it's funny that you would bring that up, because when we were downtown today, we found one of your parking spaces down there has been converted to bike parking. And this is called a bike corral. And this is a program that they have in Portland. It's a volunteer program where business owners can request that the parking space in front of their business on the street be converted to a bike corral, which is just the parking space with the hoops. Usually it's just the U-hoops for parking bikes. This program has been so popular, they have a waiting list of 50 to 60 businesses that want the parking spaces converted. Why? Why would they want their parking space converted to bicycle parking? Yes? That's right. One person in a car, you can put 12 bikes there. So you can have 12 customers instead of one. So yes, you're right. That is something that business owners start figuring out very quickly, that this is a good way for them to attract customers. If people are able to get to those locations by walking or biking, then they are in favor of this infrastructure.
Another question, very common. I think many of these methods previously tried to many TV and ensure the parking space, ensure provide the sidewalk, especially the common blah blah. So from my experience, we think of those projects on the I think what we do is their education. Because in their education, they focus on increasing mobility rather than accessibility.
Right.
Accessibility. We want to, for the minor street and better street, we want to pay people, as you mentioned on the next of the design menu, we want to they know this, but we never show the design. So we need to switch on education engineers. So that's a, if we care to this, we care to less transportation. I think we really go out with our education maximum taking our costs.
Yeah, so the comment was about transportation demand management, and that seeks to achieve the same goals, and depending on the community you're in, they approach this in different ways. For example, in Boulder, they have an eco-pass, they call it, and the businesses downtown provide these to their employees if they would like them, and they get free access to the buses and other benefits. There is also a federal credit that you can get for employees who bicycle to work. You can take a look at this. There's the commuter benefit for drivers and for transit. Bicycling was in there. Of course, you know, all of those things were eliminated in the proposed bill, but it's dead on arrival in the Senate. Nevertheless, you should find out how your representative stood on that. But you can get a tax benefit for employees who bicycle to work. They can deduct the cost of their bikes, their equipment, etc. So there are a variety of ways to make this an incentive, not a requirement, and to help people figure out how to do these things. I agree transportation demand management is great. It's programmatic, and most of the places I know who do that are in non-attainment air quality areas, and they use the CMAQ funding to fund those programs. So
Let's take two more structured questions, then we'll break up the formal session, but I'm sure Cynthia will stay around and chat with you informally or take additional sessions after that.
yes.
You mentioned linking funding for healthcare to funding for transit networks.
Funding from healthcare to fund transit and pedestrian networks. Yes, the health community can be very beneficial because if you're appearing before a body that, you know, city council, whoever, and you're advocating for walking and biking and transit, in my past, and I'm sure in the past of most of the planners who are older in this room, they'd say, well, that's fine, we'll put that in if we have money left over. It was seen as fluff and as an amenity, not as a part of the transportation system. Now we know, and we've got documented proof, that giving people the option to use active transportation can improve health, and thereby it lowers your health costs. Yes, the CDC. Yes, go to the CDC's website and put in active transportation. They have funded a lot of research. The research documents are posted there, and you can pull them up and take a look at them. So one of the advocates you could look to in your community are your healthcare organizations. We have an organization in our community called CU Fit Families. Our public radio and television station put it together, and we pulled together a coalition of a very diverse representation of the organizations and people in the community, and the Public Health District is working with us hand in hand now. And we got a Safe Routes to School grant for a school, and part of it was to put in a sidewalk so the kids from this elementary school can take field trips to the health department and participate in a community garden. So there is a lot of opportunity for networking here, and the health providers can be great supporters and very helpful for you. And the CDC has provided some funding to communities to look at these things as well in terms of research before and after for putting in infrastructure. Is there anybody up there as a question? Nope. Okay, one more down here. Over here.
So what policies are detrimental to creating complete streets? What local policies are?
So the question is, what local policies are detrimental to having complete streets? If you have policies that have minimum lane widths that are too wide, those are your design standards. If you have requirements for a high level of service and you only look at the vehicular level of service, that is detrimental as well. So for example, the University of Illinois campus, we want a bad level of service at the intersections in the core of the campus. So if it's D or F, that's good. And when people in the community complain to me about how it's hard to drive on campus, I say, guess what? They don't want you driving on campus. There are 42,000 students, 12,000 faculty and staff in a very small area, and if everyone tried to drive, what would happen? Gridlock. In addition, it decreases safety. That's another thing that you should take a look at is safety statistics and pound safety. That is a big one, and if you reduce speeds and you improve access for other modes, then you will see a benefit to safety. The one slide that I showed earlier, one of our road diets, it was done in part. The bike lanes were put in. You see how the bike lanes, they narrowed the lanes down. And so sometimes a bike lane is important to narrowing down the travel lanes. The narrower the travel lane, the slower people go. We heard here, you're happier if you can go slow, if you can keep going. And if you put in skinny streets and wider intersections, you put in skinny streets with roundabouts, people can get where they need to go actually without having to stop a lot. Reduces greenhouse gas emissions, reduces crashes. Those are all things that communities find will benefit them. So that's our two more questions. Thank you all very much for having me come here. I'm delighted to be here.